Hi everyone, I'm Kelly Klapstein, the author of The Art of Watercolor Lettering. I'm proud to say that I'm born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta, and I spent a lot of time in the library as a kid. So it's a really wonderful feeling to know that the Edmonton Public Library carries or distributes or has my book for your use. And I hope that you can learn watercolor lettering and enjoy it as a relaxing and calming art form. So let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is the why of watercolor lettering. Why do we want to paint pretty letters? Well, it's a creative expression. You can use it for lots of different art and crafting. You can make home decor signs. There's so many different styles you can combine. You can get fun and make birthday cards. I think most people use watercolor lettering in their art journals and also for home decor. You can frame a piece of watercolor lettering. Words are powerful, letters are powerful, and when you combine the beauty of watercolor and letters, you will have some really, really fun results. So let's take a look at the book and see how we get started. The most important thing to learn when you're starting out is all about supplies. It's so confusing. There's so many options in terms of paints and brushes, paper, so I have everything you want to know about this in Chapter 1. Let's take a look at Chapter 1, and I'm going to talk about what you need to get started. In Chapter 1, you'll learn first and foremost about paints. There are tubes, there's palettes, and there's liquids. My preference for watercolor lettering are liquid watercolors. There's different brands. This is my own brand, but having a liquid gives you more freedom to, how can I say it? You're not mixing as much, you're just getting down to the business of painting letters. Instead of using a tube, squeezing it out, mixing it with water, etc. So if you have liquid, you need palettes. Palettes come in many different shapes and sizes. They basically have wells. This one has 6 wells, well 7 with the one in the center. They're different shapes, but this is kind of the standard flower or daisy palette. They could be plastic or glass, but they have to contain that liquid watercolor. What do you do with a palette? You take your liquid watercolor. Most of them do have an eyedropper. So let's take the teal. We get just 1 or 2 drops. Honestly, that's all I work with. I am really skimpy with my palettes. I don't fill the well with the liquid watercolor or with water. Now, the next step is these watercolor inks are actually concentrated. So you're going to use a pipette or something similar. And I have a glass of fresh water that's clean, and I'm going to add water to my liquid in the palette. And then I'm going to find out what color it is later by swatching it out. So we have inks, liquid watercolor, we have a palette, we have a pipette, we have clean water. I use 1 jar water. Some people have a clean jar and a dirty jar. I use 1 jar. And we need brushes. So for watercolor lettering, I highly recommend a round 1 or 2 brush. Different brands have different sizes. These are my own brand of brushes. The most important thing is they are called a round brush for watercolor, and the tip is stiff and springy. It is not floppy like a kid's paint box brush. So the tip has to spring back to a point when you're using it when it's wet. That's really important to get different variations and weights of lines. The other type of brush you could use that is really popular with watercolor lettering artists is water brush. So water brushes have an empty barrel and they have a synthetic nylon tip. This is, I recommend an extra fine or a fine tip. This is an extra fine. You open it up, you fill it with water. There is the option of filling it with watercolor paint as well. I just use mine with water. Why do people like a water brush? Well, for one thing, you don't have to maybe load up with paint as often. They really like this type of synthetic nylon tip. And I kind of tend to go with a natural brush like this rather than a water brush because I find I can't always control the water in the brush. Now we have paints and brushes. We need paper. So in the book, you learn about the different paints, you learn about the brushes, and you learn about what kind of watercolor paper is best for lettering. This is different than watercolor paper that you use for painting, landscapes or what have you, because with lettering, you do want to have as smooth a surface as possible. The best kind of watercolor paper is smooth paper. So you can use Bristol paper. If you look at this paper, I don't know if you can see if it's visible, there isn't much texture at all. And hot press paper is good for that as well. So I have my watercolor paper. Now I'm going to tell you something kind of surprising. You can also practice your watercolor lettering on plain paper. Could be lined paper, just like loose leaf paper. I have this grid paper, graph paper, which I highly recommend, as long as it's a little bit heavier weight, not super, super thin, because it has to, take some paint. But you're not going to douse this with a lot of water when you're practicing. So using regular paper will save you a lot of money as opposed to practicing only on watercolor paper. Plus, when you're practicing lettering, you are going to use lines. So whether it's line paper or graph paper or grid paper like this, please use lines when you're practicing. Let's take a look at Chapter 2. It's called Getting Started. You have your supplies. What do you do first? If you're a beginner, it's best to practice learning about colors. I don't give a lot of color theory in this book because you can just get another watercolor book and learn about that. The focus is on the lettering. So I teach you how to mix a few colors, the basic color wheels, and swatching. Swatches are really important when it comes to using watercolor because you want to know what color you are painting with. There's different examples of how you make swatches, so we're going to take a look at that. The other part of Chapter 2, which is really important, is warming up with painting. Painting with watercolors can be really fearful for a lot of people. So I'm going to show you how to kind of take that fear away and get going with your brushes, paint, and paper. Painting a swatch is common practice for any watercolor artist. Whether you have new paints or paints you currently have, you want to know what colors they are, what values you can get from them. I recommend just doing a basic swatch starting with full concentrate of liquid watercolors. So this is where I put my teal and I added a couple of drops of water. Some people like to record that. I kind of am more relaxed, so I don't. Then you can do a shape. I recommend a round shape, a circle, or an oval when you're doing your swatches because this is the shape that is most common in lettering. So I do one circle, I go into my water, I dip once, I do another circle, and you can make these circles smaller. Every time you make a circle, it's good practice. Now I'm going to dip again and do another circle, and you can see how the teal gets lighter and lighter. I usually do 3 or 4 swatches of the same color, and the last one is going to be super light. Then I would label this. I could punch holes in this, keep this in a binder, or keep it handy. There's a close-up look at what the teal looks like, and I would write teal on this. Now I could cut this out and put it on a ring. I could leave it all on one page and, like I said, put it in a folder or a binder, but doing swatches is really important to help you understand how your inks dilute and what their values look like with water added. Now I'm going to show you from chapter 2 a warm-up exercise that will really make you comfortable with your brush, how to use water, how much water you should get, how much liquid on your brush, and so on. What's important with watercolor lettering is making different weights of lines, so thin lines and thick lines. What you're going to do with the leaf exercise is you're going to learn how to make thick and thin lines by putting pressure on your brush. So we can do this in two directions. Let's do a leaf downwards, starting with the tip of my brush, then pushing, then releasing, and then lightening up and dragging my brush downwards. Now I'm going to add load up again, tap on the side of my palette, start at the tip again, going out. I'm going to push, release, and come back in again. I like to leave a white space in there in the center of my leaf, but you certainly don't have to. So I'll do one more of these leaves. Tip of my brush, pulling downwards, pushing the belly down, releasing, and coming out like this. And then starting at the tip again, coming downwards, pushing. I went out a little bit, coming back in, lightening up, and getting that leaf shape. Now let's try the leaf shape going upwards. So we're going to start at the down here and lightly go up and push and release and come to the tip. I really want you to focus on starting narrow and with the tip and ending with the tip of the brush there. So try to get that point. Even I mean, this is a challenging exercise for me sometimes, so don't worry if you can't get it first off, but that is going to be your focus. Your leaves don't have to look exactly the same. You can have variation. Don't be hard on yourself if you're a perfectionist to try to make them all the same. You can see for this leaf I didn't load up because I could tell that I had enough liquid on my brush. So during this leaf exercise, going up and downwards with your leaves, you are going to learn how much water you have on your brush, how long of a stroke you can get. When you load up, I will say one thing, sometimes for lettering, you will have a fully loaded brush, but most of the time you will load up your brush with the ink or watercolor, and then you will wipe some off on the edge of your well. Otherwise, you will have too much watercolor ink, and you will have some difficulties with that. Let's go on to chapter 3. In chapter 3, you're going to learn about the different styles of letters there are. Watercolor lettering can be any kind of style you like. I focus on basically two styles: block, serif and sans serif, and script. Block alphabet lettering, you do need a fair bit of control with your lines. You're going to focus on using rectangles. You have to work on curves. And that is why at the back of the book, you have a number of different exercises to practice, plus alphabets. And here's a block alphabet. You can look and paint. And other styles of block alphabets that you can copy and look at as well as your guides. So this book has a lot of resources in the last chapter. Is that chapter 7, I think? I should know this. Yeah, 7. To practice the script style of lettering in chapter 3, you're going to want to pop into chapter 7 at the back and practice these basic strokes. So script lettering focuses on these strokes, and then you take these strokes and you actually make the letters of the alphabet. So people might look at this page and think, if you don't know anything about calligraphy or lettering, and think, well, what is the point of this? All of these strokes put together in different ways, make the 26 letters of the alphabet. So this is really, really important. So you want to grab your grid paper or line paper. It doesn't have to be watercolor paper. If you're using watercolor paper, I recommend that you do draw lines on it. And you need 2 lines. These are about an inch apart, 2.5 centimeters. I am going to switch to my size 2 watercolor brush. I have my ink here, and if you want to save on ink, you can dilute it much more so it's not as dark. That's the beauty of watercolor ink, is you can dilute it and get much more value for the amount that you purchased. So I'm going to get my brush wet first, and then I'll dip it into the ink. I will load up. I'll tap on the side, and my grid, this height of this on my grid paper is probably maybe 3 or 4 squares high. I'll go to 4 squares high, and I'm going to lightly practice doing upstrokes like this, just thin lines. When you move your brush in script lettering, you are going to have a thin line and a light touch every time you move upwards. Let me zoom in. And when you move downwards, you are going to have, like this, let me just move this down, you're going to push down and have a thick stroke. And that is essential. That's an essential technique for lettering script with watercolor or with a brush pen. So you can see on the paper, I'm not really filling up or reloading my brush very much, because on paper, you will find that your watercolor ink goes a long way. Now let's look at a couple of other of these. I won't go through all of them, but they all have names. So this is an underturn, overturn, compound curves, ascender loop, descender loop, and at the bottom we have the oval and the reverse oval. Okay, so let's just practice the underturn. Remember to keep it at the same size when you're practicing. So you can push down, release pressure, and come up. I'm going to add more ink to my brush. Push down, release pressure, and come up like that. All right. Let's say you've practiced and practiced. You're getting really handy with your pen. You can release pressure when you need to. Then you're going to practice the alphabet. So on YouTube, I have a bunch of videos on how to practice the alphabet in script lettering. You do not start with the first letters of the alphabet. So A, B, C, D, E have ovals in them, and they are really challenging to learn. You want to start with something easy. You want to start with I, N, T. And if you check out chapter 3, you will find the order that you're going to learn all the strokes and the letters. So for example, for the underturn, you're going to learn that you're going to practice the I and the T and the R and the U. That's all you're going to practice. You're not going to paint the whole alphabet in one sitting on the very first day. Do I sound bossy? Okay, otherwise you won't be building muscle memory and you'll have trouble learning. So because we just worked on the underturn here, we are going to work on I'll paint the I, the T, and the R and the U. So you can have your book here ready, or you're looking at it online. And I will do my I. This I just comes down like this and release and exit. And I push to dot it. Now let's take a look at the T. The T, right here, you see the arrow, follow the arrow, you go up, you can go up all the way and come down, and you push down. Remember what I said about light up and pushing down? Okay, so let's go up lightly, and push down, and release and exit. Now this T has a loop in the top. That's just a style. You don't have to have a loop. You can actually go lightly up like this, stop there, and then push down with your T for your T and come end in an underturn. So do you see how the I, the T is the same as this underturn? That's how you're going to learn. It's very systematic in terms of practicing and studying the script alphabet. Okay, we'll do the U. So the U comes down like this, comes up. You can do a loop, but that's actually really hard. What I also suggest is you can actually draw the U with 2 undertones like this. And the last letter we'll look at is the letter R. So the letter R, you can follow the arrow, you go up lightly, you come around, you push, and you can stop there, or you can push down and release into that underturn. And you'll see I'll do it both ways. Sometimes I don't stop for the R. I know this is a lot of information. You're saying, what? If some of you don't do lettering, you might kind of struggle to understand this. So this is all in one stroke. Let me do that in stopping here. If you're stopping and you're lettering, you do want to stop at an appropriate place, and this is a good place where you can just add that underturn. And this is one style of R. There's many styles of R. I mean, you could do an R like this, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm just taking a look and introducing you to this. Now let's take a look at what a block letter alphabet would look like. In Chapter 7 on page 115, right after the script samples and words, you have a block alphabet. This is, of course, a sans serif, so we don't have little feet on it. So let's just practice on our graph paper a couple of these letters. We'll do A, B, and C. If you look closely, you will see that a shadow has been added to this, so this is a really good exercise for adding dimension to your letters. We're not going to do that right now. I'll just show you how to paint A, B, C. We also have thin strokes and thick strokes, so try to remember your lessons about thick lines and thin lines. Put down my grid paper and this here, get my brush, have paint on it. That's loaded up. And we're going to do the letter A. So block, I'm going to go up lightly and come down, pushing down, making it as even as possible. And then I will have a cross stroke to cross over on the A. I'll just zoom in here. Now I'm not going to do a serif alphabet, but I will just quickly show you that you can easily change this into serif by adding those little feet onto the A. Okay, let's do the B. B is quite hard because even though you start with this straight block line here, you now have 2 curves, and these curves are really challenging. So take your time, and you know how I said earlier, focus on one letter at a time or one stroke at a time with the script. Do the same with the block. Pick a letter and just work on it, practice it and practice it and practice it. Your goal when you're practicing is not to paint A to Z. You're going to paint one letter at a time. And we'll do C. So I'm going to load up, and the C is in one stroke, starting at the top, going lightly up, pushing, releasing, and coming up again. I also want to mention that you do want to try to paint your letters in one stroke. So let's look at the A. The A starts here. I'm going to go up, I'm going to push down, and I'm going to stop there. That is one stroke. You don't want to start and stop because then it's going to be hard to have nice clean lines. B would be 3 strokes, and I would dip my brush 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. And you just saw me paint the C is 1 stroke. So painting letters isn't necessarily going like this and then making it thicker and doing that. Using your brush skillfully is really important when it comes to lettering with paint. With watercolors, if you paint like this in a whole bunch of tiny strokes and try to fill it in, you are going to see a lot of variation in color. You're going to get blooms, and you'll run into quite a few different issues. So 1 stroke, load up your brush, do the next stroke, and try to perfect your skills that way. What do we have in Chapter 4, 5, and 6? Let's take a look. You've become comfortable with your brush, you've practiced script and block, now you get to play around. So in Chapter 4, Color Play, you can learn different techniques of lettering, wet on dry, wet on wet, combining colors, blending colors together, and that's the beauty of watercolor lettering. Using those beautiful rainbows of colors to create unique, one-of-a-kind pieces of art. And the really popular technique that I've taught is galaxy letters. So what you need to do to create galaxy lettering, it takes you through step by step. This is a really fun chapter. Lettering with painter's tape is another technique, using a banner, layering your letters, watercolor, black paper, white lettering, and then Chapter 5 are more creative techniques. What do I mean by that? Using watercolor pencils, that's really fun. Using water-based markers, inks, watercolor, masking fluid, using water brushes. So you can take this water brush, like I mentioned at the beginning, and fill it with different colors and paint with that. Chapter 6 are dreamy designs. So at the end, you've learned the alphabet, you've practiced your script, your block, and now you can take all of those skills and you can paint quotes. So I take you right through the whole process of painting quotes. Wreaths are also very popular, and florals for lettering with watercolors. So there's a few examples and projects. This monogram is a really fun project. Creating dimension is really a valuable skill in watercolor lettering. I show you how to do that. And then we're at the end at Chapter 7, where you have all of your tracing guides and alphabet samples to get practicing. There's also a few projects at the back. So we have that peace wreath, dimensional love. We have a French quote. I had to actually use different languages when I wrote this book because it's can be translated into other countries. And then this cute little alphabet heart idea. I hope you enjoyed this short introduction to the art of watercolor lettering. Watercolor and lettering in general has brought a lot of joy into my life, and I hope it does the same for you.
Summer Starts at EPL is here from June 19th to August 29th. All throughout the summer, kids will read, participate in fun activities, and win prizes. But don't feel left out, grown-ups. We have a summer reading program for you, too. Summer Reads is our adult version. There's something for readers of all ages this summer at EPL.